He was the golden voice of gospel music. A man whose vocal power could move entire arenas to tears. Winner of multiple Grammy and Dove Awards. The shining star of the legendary Gaither Vocal Band. When Michael English stepped onto a stage, something almost supernatural happened. People would close their eyes, raise their hands, and feel the presence of something greater than themselves. His voice was not just beautiful. It was anointed. At least, that is what everyone believed. But in 1994, everything came crashing down. The man who had stood on the highest mountain of Christian music fell into the deepest valley imaginable. His awards were stripped away. His record deals vanished. His friends disappeared. The same community that had lifted him up now wanted nothing to do with him. For 3 decades, bits and pieces of the story have circulated through gospel music circles. Rumors. Whispers. Judgments. But now, at 63 years old, Michael English is finally sharing what really happened behind those closed doors. This is not just a story about scandal. This is a story about pain, addiction, abandonment, and ultimately, the long and brutal road back to redemption. To understand how far Michael English fell, you first need to understand how high he climbed. Michael was born in 1962 in a small town in North Carolina. There was nothing particularly special about his childhood circumstances. His family was working class. Money was always tight. But from the earliest age, it was clear that Michael had something different. His voice. Even as a young boy, when he opened his mouth to sing, people stopped what they were doing and listened. In the small churches of rural North Carolina, word began to spread about this kid with the golden voice. His parents recognized his gift and encouraged him to pursue music. They did not have money for fancy vocal coaches or music schools, but they had faith. And in those early years, faith was enough. Michael grew up singing in church. He learned to connect with audiences. He learned that music was not just about hitting the right notes. It was about reaching into people's souls and touching something deep inside them. By the time he was a teenager, Michael knew exactly what he wanted to do with his life. He wanted to sing. Not just anywhere. He wanted to sing gospel music. He wanted to use his gift to spread a message of hope and faith. Little did he know that this dream would take him to heights he never imagined. And depths he never thought possible. Michael's big break came when he joined the Gaither Vocal Band. For anyone outside the gospel music world, it is hard to explain just how significant this was. Bill Gaither was not just a singer or a songwriter. He was an institution. He had been shaping gospel music for decades. His songs were sung in churches across America every single Sunday. To join the Gaither Vocal Band was like being called up to the major leagues. It meant you had arrived. Michael joined the group and immediately made an impact. His voice added a new dimension to their sound. The power. The range. The raw emotion he brought to every performance. Audiences responded instantly. They could feel that this young man was special. Bill Gaither himself recognized Michael's extraordinary talent. He gave Michael opportunities to shine. Solo moments during concerts. Featured spots on recordings. Michael was not just a member of the group. He was quickly becoming its brightest star. The years with the Gaither Vocal Band were magical. They toured constantly, performing for packed audiences across the country. Michael was living his dream. He was singing gospel music at the highest level. He was surrounded by talented musicians who shared his faith. He was making a good living doing what he loved. Everything seemed perfect. But perfection, as Michael would later learn, is often an illusion. Then came 1994. The year that would define Michael English's life in ways he never could have anticipated. That year, Michael attended the Dove Awards ceremony. The Dove Awards are the Grammy Awards of gospel music. They represent the highest recognition a Christian artist can receive. Michael was nominated in multiple categories. And when the night was over, he had won an astounding 6 Dove Awards. 6. In one single night. No one had ever done anything like it before. Michael English was officially the king of gospel music. The Christian community celebrated him. Record labels wanted him. Magazines featured him on their covers. He was living proof that talent combined with faith could lead to extraordinary success. He had a beautiful wife. A thriving career. The respect and admiration of millions. He stood at the very top of the mountain. But what nobody knew, what Michael himself was barely willing to admit, was that cracks had already formed beneath the surface. The pressure of fame. The constant touring. The expectations of being a Christian role model every single moment of every single day. It was taking a toll. And Michael was about to make a decision that would shatter everything he had built. The affair came to light suddenly and brutally. Michael had been involved with another woman in the gospel music industry. When the news broke, it spread like wildfire through the Christian community. Remember, this was not just any musician having an affair. This was Michael English. The Golden Boy. The man who had just won 6 Dove Awards. The man who sang about faith and redemption and the love of God. The hypocrisy, in the eyes of many, was unforgivable. The reaction was swift and merciless. Michael was forced to return his Dove Awards. Think about that for a moment. The very trophies that represented the pinnacle of his career. He had to give them back. His record label dropped him immediately. They wanted nothing to do with the scandal. Christian radio stations stopped playing his music overnight. Concert promoters canceled his bookings. The phone that had been ringing constantly with opportunities suddenly went silent. But perhaps the most painful rejection came from the Christian community itself. People who had called themselves his friends disappeared. Churches that had once begged him to perform now would not return his calls. He was treated like a leper. An outcast. Someone to be avoided and condemned. The message was clear. You have sinned. You are no longer one of us. What followed were the darkest years of Michael English's life. The public only saw the scandal. They did not see what happened after the cameras stopped rolling. They did not see Michael alone in his apartment, wondering how everything had fallen apart so quickly. The depression came first. A heavy, suffocating darkness that made it hard to get out of bed in the morning. Michael had built his entire identity around his music and his faith. Now both seemed to be gone. Who was he without the stage? Who was he without the applause? Who was he when the people who claimed to love him suddenly treated him like a stranger? These questions tormented him day and night. He could not escape them. And so he began looking for ways to numb the pain. Prescription drugs became his escape. At first, it seemed harmless enough. Just something to take the edge off. Just something to help him sleep through the nights that seemed to stretch on forever. But addiction does not work that way. It starts small and grows until it consumes everything. Michael found himself needing more and more just to function. The pills became his constant companion. His crutch. His prison. The addiction destroyed what little was left of his life. His marriage, already strained by the affair, completely collapsed. His finances fell apart. The money he had earned during his successful years disappeared. Medical bills. Legal fees. The cost of feeding an addiction that demanded more every single day. Michael went from being one of the highest paid performers in gospel music to wondering how he would pay his rent. He lost his home. He lost his dignity. He lost any sense of who he was supposed to be. And in his darkest moments, he lost his will to live. Michael has spoken openly about the suicidal thoughts that plagued him during this period. When you are in that much pain, when every single thing you valued has been taken away, when the people who claim to love you have abandoned you, death can start to seem like a relief. A way to finally escape the unbearable weight of shame and regret. Michael came close. Closer than most people realize. He stood at the edge of the abyss and looked down into the darkness. What kept him from jumping? He is not entirely sure himself. Maybe it was some tiny spark of faith that refused to be extinguished. Maybe it was the fear of causing even more pain to the people he had already hurt. Maybe it was just not his time. Whatever the reason, Michael survived. But surviving is not the same as living. And he still had a long way to go. The road to recovery did not happen overnight. There was no single moment of clarity. No dramatic turning point. It was a slow, painful process of putting one foot in front of the other. Michael had to face his addiction head-on. He had to admit that he was powerless over the pills. He had to accept help from people who understood what he was going through. Rehabilitation was humbling. Here was a man who had performed for presidents. A man who had won the highest awards in his industry. And now he was sitting in group therapy sessions, admitting his weaknesses, listening to others share their stories of pain and recovery. But something unexpected happened in those rooms. Michael began to rediscover his humanity. He realized that he was not alone in his suffering. He realized that failure and shame were not unique to him. Everyone in those rooms had fallen from somewhere. Everyone was fighting their way back. And somehow, that knowledge made the journey a little less lonely. Rebuilding his faith was perhaps the hardest part of all. Michael had grown up in the church. His entire life had been wrapped around his relationship with God. But after the scandal, that relationship felt broken beyond repair. How could he face a God he had so publicly failed? How could he pray when he felt so unworthy of being heard? The Christian community had rejected him. Did that mean God had rejected him too? These questions haunted Michael for years. He wrestled with them in the darkness of sleepless nights. He questioned everything he had ever believed. And slowly, painfully, he began to find answers. Not the easy answers he had preached from stages during his successful years. Not the simple formulas of sin and forgiveness that fit neatly into gospel songs. But something deeper. Something more real. Michael came to understand that God's grace was not a reward for good behavior. It was a gift for broken people. And he was very, very broken. This realization did not come easily. It came through tears and doubt and countless moments of despair. But eventually, it came. And when it did, Michael began to heal. Music was always going to be part of his journey back. You cannot give someone a voice like Michael English's and expect them to remain silent forever. But returning to the stage was terrifying. The last time he had been in the spotlight, it had destroyed him. Why would he risk that again? The answer was simple. Music was who he was. Without it, he was only half alive. Michael began performing again, slowly and quietly at first. Small churches. Modest venues. Places where people were willing to give him a second chance. And something remarkable happened. Audiences responded to him differently now. They were not just impressed by his vocal abilities. They were moved by his story. They saw a man who had fallen from the highest heights and crawled through the deepest valleys. They saw someone who had failed publicly and was brave enough to keep going anyway. His performances took on a new depth. When Michael sang about grace now, he was not reciting words from a hymnal. He was testifying from personal experience. When he sang about redemption, you could hear the pain and the hope intertwined in every note. His brokenness had become his greatest strength. The question everyone asks is about Bill Gaither. What happened to that relationship? Did the man who had given Michael his big break ever forgive him? The answer is more complicated than a simple yes or no. In the immediate aftermath of the scandal, there was distance. Bill Gaither had built his ministry on Christian values. Having a member of his group involved in such a public moral failure was damaging. There were business considerations. There were ministry considerations. There was the practical reality that association with Michael English had become a liability. But Bill Gaither is not a simple man. He is someone who has spent his entire life singing about the very grace and forgiveness that Michael so desperately needed. And over time, the relationship began to heal. It did not happen quickly. Trust had been broken. Rebuilding it took years. But eventually, Bill Gaither reached out. He invited Michael to participate in homecoming events again. He gave him opportunities to perform. He demonstrated, through actions rather than just words, that redemption was possible. Their relationship today is not what it was during those early glory years. Too much has happened for that. But there is respect. There is understanding. And most importantly, there is reconciliation. Bill Gaither's willingness to welcome Michael back into the fold meant more than any award or accolade ever could. At 63 years old, Michael English looks back on his life with clear eyes. He does not make excuses for his failures. He does not minimize the pain he caused to others. He takes full responsibility for the choices that led to his downfall. But he also refuses